Week 11 gave us another batch of upsetting injuries, so congratulations if your fantasy team managed to avoid them. Still, you may have had a healthy player cost you your fantasy matchup in this pivotal time of the season. I'm Jorden Hill, and today we're going to be taking a look at some of the week's biggest underperformers and discuss a plan of action for them as we head into Week 12. We'll dive right in, but please take a moment to drop a like on the video and comment down below the names of any players that currently have you panicking. Let's start things off at the running back position with Travis Etienne. After a dominant stretch between weeks 5 and 8, Etienne has finished with fewer than 10 half PPR fantasy points in both contests since returning from a week 9 bye. Interestingly enough, Etienne is also playing on less snaps as the Jaguars have been getting Dearness Johnson a little bit more involved. I do find it strange and a bit concerning that Etienne isn't seeing the field as much as he was before the bye, but his matchups against the 49ers and Titans were both relatively difficult, and neither of these games were particularly competitive. Trevor Lawrence and the Jags offense did look really good last week, and I'd expect Etienne to find much more success next week against the Texans in a possible shootout. Next up, we have Derrick Henry, who has turned in 2 consecutive showings of fewer than 40 rushing yards and 0 touchdowns. Will Levis had an incredible debut back in week 8, but since then, the Titans offense as a whole has struggled. It's sad to say, but I just don't think King Henry is a must-start player every week at this point. I personally benched him for Devin Singletary on Sunday, and it turned out to be a great decision. However, Henry has a beautiful upcoming schedule, taking on Carolina and Indianapolis over the next 2 weeks, and facing the Houston Texans twice in the fantasy playoffs. Unless you're absolutely loaded at running back, you're probably going to want to start Henry in these matchups. At wide receiver, let's start things off with Ja'Marr Chase. Chase salvaged his Thursday night performance with a touchdown, but secured just 2 of 7 targets for 12 yards. This, of course, was against the stout Baltimore Ravens defense, but the concern here is obviously with the Bengals quarterback situation. With Joe Burrow now out for the season, Chase will have to catch passes from Jake Browning, who has yet to play in a full NFL game. His schedule over the next few weeks is pretty nice, but I think it's impossible not to panic at least a little bit about Chase right now. I'd still absolutely start him against the Steelers next week, and it's hard to imagine a world where you're benching Chase at any point down the stretch. Let's move on to Gabe Davis. Davis had a pretty strong start to the campaign, but has posted 0 fantasy points in 2 of his last 3 games, and wasn't even targeted on Sunday. This is the Gabe Davis experience. He's been inconsistent throughout his career, delivering huge numbers one week and totally disappearing the next. Typically, I'd say a player like Davis is droppable, but I would hate to cut him just to have my opponent play him against me, especially next week against the Eagles, who surrender the most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. If you can hold on to him, he'll be a quality flex option in that matchup. I would hope no one is relying on Jerry Jeudy in their starting lineups, but he is still rostered in the majority of leagues. We really haven't seen any sort of upside from Jeudy this season, as Courtland Sutton is hogging all of the receiving touchdowns in Denver. Jeudy has scored double-digit fantasy points just twice all year. His schedule for the fantasy playoffs is enticing, so your decision to keep him around may depend on who's available on waivers. If there is someone worthwhile out there though, I wouldn't hesitate to drop Jeudy because there's simply no way you can start him in Week 12 against the Browns. Finally, let's talk about Garrett Wilson. Wilson had been pretty consistent in recent weeks, but he had a nightmare of a game in Week 11, finishing with 2 receptions for 9 yards and a lost fumble. I know the general consensus is that New York's offense can't get much worse than it has been with Zach Wilson under center, but I definitely wouldn't get your hopes up thinking Tim Boyle is an upgrade. The 29-year-old Boyle was named the starter for Week 12, and just to give a little bit of background, he's bounced around the league since 2018 and has 3 touchdowns to 9 interceptions in 18 career appearances. Wilson should still be the focal point of the Jets' passing attack, and the matchup against the Dolphins on Friday is a juicy one, but I would be trying my best to find another option until we see proof that Boyle can support him for fantasy purposes. Hope you guys enjoyed. Please remember to subscribe to RotoBaller to stay up to date with all of our fantasy football content that'll help you win big in 2023. Thanks so much for tuning in, and best of luck in Week 12.